Okay, so we should have recording on the way now. I just need to make sure. Rach, I can see you're on the recording, and oh, we've got a few people coming in now. Typical. Right. I'm going to start because it's 2 minutes past 10. I know everyone's busy and it's a Friday. I'm going to just crack on with the recording. If you want to stay muted and invisible, that's fine. And I'm going to give you an opportunity at the end for Q&A. Can I just ask if you can hear me and see me? If someone, Jackie, can you just unmute yourself and tell me you can hear me?
Moment. Right, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me and see me?
Yeah, sorry, I was with a client, so I've just dived in.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm recording just so you know.
No, it's fine. I want to be in on this one.
Okay, Jackie, can you hear me and see the screen? But can you see the bone health slides?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so if you want to unmute yourself and turn your video off, I'm going to do the recording for the presentation, and then I'm going to stop the recording, and at the end I will give you all the opportunity to do Q&A.
Okay, fab.
Okay, thanks. Right, so I'm just going to crack on now. I'm going to try and be clever and do this from the start. I feel like I haven't done this for ages. Hang on a minute. Slideshow, play from start. So you should be seeing the whole screen now. And then I just need to make sure that I can move this page on. Okay, so we are all here to learn a little bit about how to protect our bone health, which gets more and more important as we get older, and especially for women once they've gone through menopause. Really important for us to take care of that because that's one of the risk factors for developing osteopenia and osteoporosis. So I'm just going to introduce myself quickly for anyone who's not met me before. My name's Evie. I'm a qualified BANT registered nutritional therapist. I've been in practice for over 10 years. I do specialise in gut health, so it might be a bit odd to you, some of you, why I'm talking about bone health, but I recently got invited to speak to the Osteoporosis Society and had a really, really interesting talk with them and was absolutely so shocked when I went around the room and spoke to the people in the room, how they found out they had osteoporosis. And most of them actually just found out by turning over in bed, reaching for a glass of water, and they just heard cracks and their spine just sort of crumbled or cracked. They got fractures. And I was really shocked to find out that there's actually not much preventative care in place. Certainly in the NHS, we are offered a DEXA scan, but usually it's when there is a suspicion that you've had a fracture or you've had a bone problem. And we know that menopause is one of the most important factors for women to consider. Other than diet. So we're going to look at all of the risk factors, how you can assess your own risk, and then what we can do about it. And we're going to look at the nutrients and diet and supplements and all the science as well that supports this. So everything I tell you is evidence-based. And I am on tap for you. If you want to wait to the end, if you have time, I will stop the recording and give you the opportunity to do Q&A with me. And if anyone needs to jump off before I get to that point, that's fine. And you can just contact me through my normal channels, through my website, which is www.evnutrition.co.uk. And you can contact me there and ask your questions, and I will privately and personally respond to every single question. Right, so let's just move on. For the purpose of time, I don't want to keep you too long. So what we're going to look at is we're going to have a quick overview of what osteoporosis is, the foods that help bone remodeling. I will explain in this sort of language as well, so that you're really clear on what we're talking about here. And the best bone health diet that is supported by evidence that will protect your bones. We're going to look at the research, and then we're going to look at what everyday things you can do to boost your bone health and prevent that loss of bone density. We're going to look at supplements. Are they worth it? Which ones have the evidence? And then we're going to look at testing options for assessing your risk, because that really seems to be the best preventative way that you can take care of yourself, is by knowing your risk factors, knowing if there's any deficiencies, and then approaching it from a very targeted and personalised point of view. And it's all possible. And earlier you can get there, the better. So if you do have risk factors, or you know that there's a family history of it, or you've had problems before, with bone problems or any fractures, then assessing your risk really seems to be the best way to move forward with that. And then I will show you a few recipes, and we will do Q&A at the end. So what we're looking at here is that honeycomb matrix inside the bone tissue, and you can see that the bigger the holes get, the more risk of fracture you have. So we really want that nice bone density to be there to protect us, and we don't want the more holes, the worse it is. I'll explain that in the way that I like to explain it. I'll jump to this slide. Is I like to explain it as like workmen in the road. So you've got the workmen that are digging up the road, and they make the holes. But what we want really is the workmen to come back and fill those holes back in. And what we're talking about here are the bone cells. They're osteoblasts and osteoclasts. And the way I remembered it when I was learning it, learning through my diploma, was that osteoclasts clear, they make the holes, and osteoblasts build, and they put the holes, fill the holes back in. So what we really want to do is slow the rate that the digging happens, so slow the rate of the holes being made, and actually prevent those holes happening. We can do that. We've learned that we can do that through diet and through lifestyle. And then we want to give the opportunity for the osteobuilds to come back in and fill those holes in. So if we can slow the rate of the clearing and the holes being made, and really promote the osteobuilds to come in and do their job, we can potentially slow the rate of osteoporosis happening. So these are the causes of osteoporosis, the most obvious causes that we know from the science will put you at greater risk of developing osteopenia and osteoporosis. And that is actually having less osteoblasts. And that can be because you're not making enough of them. And we'll look at some of the reasons why that might be. But one of the biggest reasons can be sedentary behaviour. So not being active enough, because we know that that impact of just walking, exercise, bone building exercise like skipping, running, walking, all of those things, or even just walking up and down the stairs and lifting bags, carrying things, that can actually really help to encourage the osteoblasts to build the bone tissue. We also know that aging is one of the most important risk factors, and I mentioned it earlier, post-menopause as well. So when we go through menopause, that's a risk factor. But one that you might not have thought of, one of the really common risk factors is actually inflammation. So if you've already got an inflammatory condition, and we could call that, that could be rheumatoid arthritis, that could be high blood pressure, it could be a higher cardiovascular risk with things like high cholesterol. That's all inflammatory conditions, and they all contribute to loss of bone density. So the foods we know make things, everything worse. This won't be any surprise to you, I'm sure, is ultra processed foods. Lots of talk about that all around the world, talking about how we should be avoiding ultra processed foods. We know they're not good for us, right? But the reason for that is because they're very low nutrient density. They don't have any goodness in them, or not enough to protect us. And if we're relying on those ultra processed foods and fast foods for our dietary needs, we're just not hitting enough of those nutrient markers to get our diet where it should be. We also know that alcohol can be a risk factor, as is smoking. So they're two obvious things that won't be much of a surprise to you, but also too much salt, because salt leads to dehydration, and that also encourages the osteoclasts to clear and make those holes. And refined carbohydrates, that really ties in with that ultra processed and fast food picture. Lots of white bread, white pasta, white rice, chips, all that sort of thing. And the foods that help to fill the holes in, that probably won't be surprising to you either, because that's dairy, because of its nutrient density, quality calcium, which is much more bioavailable to us. So we have really good quality dairy. And that's not just drinking pints of milk, that's things like fermented dairy. So things like yogurt and kefir are really good sources, and cheese. So nice sources of calcium. But leafy greens as well, because they have so many nutrients in them that help support bone health. And we're not just talking about calcium, which is in leafy greens, we're talking about things like vitamin K2, which help to drive the calcium into the bone tissue. Whole grains as well, full of vitamins, vitamin E, fibre, nuts and seeds. And these are all anti-inflammatory foods. So you can see how that ties into the picture of one of the causative factors being inflammation. If you have a diet high in quality dairy, fermented foods, leafy greens, whole grains, nuts, seeds, lentils, beans, pulses, and lots of diversity, and good quality protein, you can see that you're getting a diet that is rich in not just calcium, but lots of other nutrients that help to keep the bone tissue flexible. So when you think about that honeycomb matrix that we are made up of, our bones are made up of, we don't just want it to be calcium rich. And if you think of calcium as being a piece of chalk that you could easily snap, it's quite brittle. You need other things in it to help that bone matrix be flexible, and that comes from all of these lovely foods. So these are things like selenium, antioxidants, the fibre I mentioned, the B vitamins, the vitamin E. These are all tied up in these lovely anti-inflammatory foods that keep the bone tissue flexible and reduce inflammation. So this might be an osteoporosis prevention diet. And I'm always a bit cautious about things that say prevention and reversal without the evidence, but there is evidence here, and I've put the link below. So if anyone wants to screenshot that, you can go and check these references I've used to help build these slides today. But what we do know is that calcium is an important part of bone health, and it's found really in abundance in dairy products. So a really good quality source of calcium and protein. And dairy product consumption, and particularly we're talking about fermented dairy, so I mentioned earlier, it's like things like kefir, live yogurt, things like that. They are associated with lower risk of fracture. But when you look at that compared to vegan diets, because vegan diets by their very nature reduce and avoid calcium from dairy, they are associated with more risk factor for fracture. So it's important for us to look at the diet overall. We're not just talking about having dairy in the diet, we're talking about other things as well, like Mediterranean style diet, which has plenty of evidence to supporting bone tissue. So the dietary patterns that might confer health benefits, they aren't just about reducing inflammation and increasing calcium. It's actually tied into how they influence and modify the gut microbiome. And we're going to come on to that in more detail because this is actually quite recent research. We know that the gut microbiome holds some really interesting magical factors that can help produce better bone density. And this is through their behavior from how they ferment and use the diet that is full of fibre. So that's the Mediterranean diet, lots of vegetables, salads, whole grains, nuts, seeds, extra virgin olive oil. All of these things are anti-inflammatory, but they really help to build a healthy gut microbiome. And we know that this whole picture of the Mediterranean diet might be also an osteoporosis prevention diet, but it does include the dairy part. So this is why I said I'm a bit cautious about the word reversal, but there was a study that did say this potentially is osteoporosis reversal diet. However, reversing osteoporosis, can we completely reverse it? I'm not entirely sure about that I could really put my, my heart on my hand on my heart and say that that's possible. But what we can say is that this diet is attributed with lower inflammation, better bone density, and it's a really good start point if you want to protect your bone health. This is what you need to be doing based on the evidence we have today, and that's following a Mediterranean diet, a diet that's rich in omega-3 fats, and our best source of omega-3 fats come from oily fish. So things like salmon, pilchard, mackerel, anchovy, wild trout, and smaller amounts in things like halibut and tuna. But it is there. So having a diet rich in these oily fish is really beneficial, and making sure that you're getting enough protein. So this is something especially for you to consider if you're vegan. Do you get a nice wide diverse range of proteins from beans, lentils, pulses, nuts, seeds, whole grains? You know, are you really choosing this diverse range? Because it's really important that you get enough protein in, because these are the building blocks for your bone tissue. Including fermented dairy. So I'm a big fan, being a specialist in gut health, obviously. I'm going to talk about kefir and live yogurt, but I'm going to show you later about why that's important, looking a bit closer to the gut microbiome behavior, how that can help your bone health. And then we know load bearing exercises, so where you're really sort of like having some impact on the ground, walking, jumping, tennis, jogging, load bearing, where you might be carrying weights or doing a few bit of weight or resistant exercise. Really powerful ways for you to build your bone tissue back up. Remember, going back to that picture of the workmen in the road, and these are the ones that are going to be filling the holes back in. So all of that exercise helps to fill them in. And balance is also really important. So not just about using impact exercise, think about exercise that are going to improve your balance, like Tai Chi or yoga, Pilates, because we obviously want to prevent falls, because we know that once you've had a fall, if there's a fall and a fracture, the recovery is much longer, prolonged, and that means much more time that you're going to be off your feet. So it's really important that you also introduce some balance exercise. And obviously find out your risk if you've got any underlying deficiencies, because they're so easy to correct. And these are really common causes for poor bone density. So we're going to look at some of the reasons why testing might be appropriate for you to assess your risk, and the specific nutrients we're looking at to make sure you're not deficient in these nutrients, so that you can make sure you're in your best bone health moving forward. I don't know if you've heard of this, the Framingham osteoporosis study. It was a huge study. It's one of the biggest studies actually for bone health. So it was done on 5,000 men and women. The average age was 77. And we know that this is really important for us to look at the outcomes of what we can do dietary wise to prevent bone breaks and fractures, because osteoporosis is responsible for 2 million bone breaks every year. And the problem with breaking the bones obviously is you're put out of action, but also the risk of death and mortality after bone breaks and fractures goes up exponentially. So we want to prevent that as much as possible. So what this study was looking at was the sort of nutrients that helped people to have their best bone health. And you're going to get excited about this. Some of you might. You can see beer and red wine on there, but I'll explain that in a bit more detail, because there is a caveat to that. Can't go out swilling the beer and the red wine hoping that your bone health is improving, because it won't do. There is a finite curve that we'll need to consider where that becomes a problem. But actually what they were looking at in the beer was that it's a really high source of silicon, and silica is a really important component of bone flexibility. And so they found that people that were having 1 or 2 beers actually did have better bone health. And the same with the red wine, but the red wine wasn't to do with the silica, it was to do with the resveratrol. And we'll look at a study later on about resveratrol. But high intakes of vitamin C was associated with less bone mineral density loss in the femoral neck, and that is the long bone in the thigh. So if you think of a cartoon bone, you know, you've got the long stick bit and then you've got the knobbly bits at the end, and the femoral neck is the bit just behind the knobbly bit, and that's where most breaks occur in the femur. And so vitamin C seemed to be preventative in that particular break point. And so vitamin C is found in so many fruit, vegetables. It's found, it really is abundant. So it would be very difficult for you to be deficient in vitamin C if you're having a nice healthy diet. However, some people need more vitamin C than others, and it's important to remember that we don't make it as humans. I think it's us and guinea pigs and bats, weirdly, don't make our own vitamin C, and we don't store it. So we do need to get it from our diet at regular intervals throughout the day, especially if you know that you have poor immune health, or you tend to pick up those coughs and colds really easily. Just make sure you're getting your regular dose of vitamin C rich foods at every stage throughout the day at your meals. So maybe a handful of berries with your breakfast, and then maybe some nice brightly coloured salad items with your lunch, and then some peas, carrots and broccoli with your dinner, and you've got really nice spread out amount of vitamin C there. So there, I've explained about the red wine and the beer, but we will look at resveratrol because that was found in a study to be really important at proving they specifically in this study looked at women's bone density. So this is my perfect breakfast for bone health. And I have a lovely VIP group. I've got some of the members here watching with me today. And they will vouch for this. So we share pictures of what we're having for breakfast, and it pretty much looks like this. We talk about flax seeds a lot. They're my favourite seed. As a gut health specialist, they're so important for gut motility and for preventing things like constipation and things like that. So they're my favourite number one seed. But they're really, really brilliant for bone health. They're also a really good source of omega-3, so they lower inflammation. Really great source of fibre. So this is the picture I would want you to look at, thinking and aiming for your breakfast. If you really want to have your best bone health and start your day off right, this would be a brilliant way for you to start your days. The berries are in there, the chia seed, the fermented dairy we talked about. If you're making a lovely green smoothie, you get your greens in there. So you've got the leafy greens. Parsley was shown in that Framingham study to be really beneficial for bone health. Really brilliant source of vitamin K2, which, as I said, picks up the calcium out of the gut, drives it to the bone tissue. So that is a lovely way for you to start your day. If you don't like dairy or you're vegan, you could have the coconut milk as a replacement. A brilliant lunch, turkey, really good source of protein, and a nice low fat source. So it's actually a really nice source of protein that's not going to contribute too many calories. Cheese, because we want the cheese in there because the calcium, the green leafy salads, some nice sourdough bread, who doesn't like that, and a side of pickles because we know fermented vegetables are brilliant for the gut, and we're going to come on to why that's important. And then you've got some really lovely calcium rich snacks that are going to help build that bone density. So things like pistachios, other nuts as well, but dried apricots, cheese cubes, things like that. And this would be an ideal dinner. So I've given you some options to really sort of build in your bone density plan of what you could aim for to help support bone health. Oily fish, a number one choice. Lean meats like turkey, beef, lean cuts of beef and pork, chicken. Lots of vegetables, so go big on the veg, and plenty of lentils, legumes, chickpeas, beans. And these are brilliant ways for you to get all of those nutrients that are really important for bone health. And this was a really interesting study. And I don't know about what your garden looks like at the moment, but mine is really overrun by nettles. So I was quite excited to come across this study, and Julie got out there and got my rubber gloves on, obviously, to protect my skin from the stings, and picked some nettle tea, made some nettle tea. And here I'm going to show you in the next slide how to make it. But this study showed that 1 cup of tea from nettle tea, look at that, it's got 125 milligrams of calcium, 75 milligrams of magnesium, 450 international units vitamin A, and also a little bit of protein. So amazing thing to have as a drink, as a herbal tea. But it also had these trace minerals that we know are really important for this flexibility of the bone tissue in preventing fractures. And you can look at those studies, but it was really interesting. So just 1 cup a day. And these studies are really evidence-based is going to demonstrate how you can just introduce these little things into your life every day and improve your bone health. This was shown to increase bone density. So it's a fantastic thing to do. So if you've got some rogue nettles in your garden, get your rubber gloves on and go out and make some tea. And here is how you make it. So you could want to get those young leaves at the top because they've got the most nutrients in them. Obviously wash them thoroughly, put them in a pan, bring them to the boil and then strain and just enjoy that tea. And I put a slice of lemon and I didn't bother with the honey because I quite like my tea unsweetened. But you could add a bit of honey as well to that. I think that would be a lovely way to protect your bones. So what a nice thing to do. Now, you might have heard about the benefits of chickpeas for bone health. And in these studies, they were shown to stimulate bone formation. So go back to right to the beginning of the slides, I was talking about these osteoblasts that build bone tissue. So they are the ones, these chickpeas can help to fill the holes back in and they prevent the workmen coming and digging the holes back out. So this is a great thing to include. So my question to you is, do you regularly include chickpeas in your diet? If you're not, these are a brilliant way for you to just get some bone density loving foods in your diet. I've got some lovely recipes on my website. If you go to my recipe page, help yourself, they're on there. I've got a lovely chickpea and sweet potato stew on there. You can make some lovely curries from them. My favourite thing to do with chickpeas at the moment is actually I roll them in a little bit of herbs and spices and olive oil and salt and pepper, and then I just roast them in my air fryer and I have them as a snack. So these are brilliant ways to get a little bit of more calcium and the isoflavones and polyphenols that we know help to build those bone holes back in and fill them in. Someone had asked me a question about dates, so I've put the slide on there, but actually I couldn't find much clinical evidence to support having dates for improving bone health. However, they taste great and I love them, but if you split them open and put a walnut in there, that would be a great way to get a bit more bone density loving foods in there. So we know walnuts are really anti-inflammatory and a great thing to have in our diet, and they taste great, so why not include them? They're a lovely part, they could be a part of your lovely breakfast. This is the study that I found the most insightful. So they did this study, it was in postmenopausal women, and it was a 12-month trial. So it was really long, randomized controlled trial. So this is sort of the gold standard of what we'd be looking for to garner evidence of what really works. It's a nice long study. And they did it in 235 women. And they had a 50-gram daily dose of prunes. And I think that probably works at about 6 to 7 prunes. So quite nice and easy thing to include with your porridge. And now the winter's coming in the UK, you know, having some prunes in your porridge or with your yogurt in the morning, really lovely thing to do. And they found that it prevented the loss of bone mineral density in the hip area. So this is really important for reducing hip fracture risk. So you can see the study link down there I've used. So you can screenshot that and go and have a bigger read of that. It's quite a long study. Now, protein intake, we do need to look at that a little bit closer because there's lots of discussion about how much protein you really need at the moment. And in my VIP group, we're running the protein challenge soon. So we're going to be looking very closely at how much protein you should be getting and how you're going to do it. And we're going to be looking at the recipes of how we're going to do that. But there's lots of arguments about how much you need. Now, this really depends on your life stage, your health condition. You know, I don't know how active you are. It's a very personalised thing to make sure you're getting enough protein, and it would be very difficult to not actually to be protein deficient. But it is important when you're looking at preventing loss of bone density that you make sure you're getting enough protein, because it would be difficult for your osteo build to come in and do the job we want them to do if your protein level is not quite right. And I think the rule of thumb is to think if you are postmenopausal or you know you already have a loss of bone mineral density, so if you're osteopenic or you already have osteoporosis, you really need to be looking at more like 1.5 and over grams per kilogram of body weight. So brilliant sources of protein here are the lean meats, fish, oily fish being one of my favourites, eggs, dairy, legumes, tofu, pulses. So really good things to get in your diet. Soybeans as well, and peas are a brilliant source of protein. So if you are vegan, make sure you're getting things like quinoa, tofu, lentils, beans, peas. If you can get a range of those in your diet over a week regularly, you should be hopefully meeting your protein requirements. Now, do supplements work? There will be lots of supplement companies out there who will want to sell you their favourite bone density formula. But the evidence isn't there for lots of it. So I've picked apart the evidence for you so you don't have to. And the evidence that I found for supplements that were helpful were collagen, vitamin D, definitely. But what I would say about vitamin D is actually to test your levels, not to just guess. Because if you ask your GP or you ask a health professional, I think the NHS rules is you need about 400 international units a day through the winter in the UK. But I can tell you from my experience in my clinic, it's not nearly enough. And lots of people, if you're already starting on the back foot and your vitamin D levels are very low, that's literally not going to touch the side. So the best way for you to find out is to test, because that's part of your assessing your risk factor for developing osteoporosis. So know your risk, know your vitamin D levels, and then you can be really targeted, because it's such an easy thing to correct, but you do need to put the right appropriate amount of vitamin D in to correct that. And also, you don't really want to be putting vitamin D on its own. It likes to go in with other cofactors that help the vitamin D to pull the calcium from your diet and put it into the bone tissue, so that make sure that the calcium's not depositing in vessel walls, which is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So we want to make sure that the calcium is going into the bone tissue, and it needs vitamin D, needs things like magnesium, selenium, K2 to make sure that that happens. So that's what I was talking about there with the bone matrix cofactors. You definitely need that collection of nutrients to help to drive the calcium into the bones. Calcium, yes, there is evidence to support calcium will help with bone density, but remember that piece of chalk I was talking about, how if you just put lots of calcium in, it kind of can give you that brittle effect of think of a piece of chalk. Calcium needs to go in with all those cofactors to help the calcium be more flexible in the bone tissue, and also to help it get there. So I don't recommend that calcium goes in on its own at high amounts. In fact, it was shown in some studies to be make things worse, and as much as heart disease. So if you've got a risk of any cardiovascular risk, I wouldn't recommend calcium at high dose. Certainly wouldn't put it in at a high dose amount on its own. So probably best to get professional personalized guidance on that. And you'll see at the end, you can book a free discovery call so we can talk this through, and I can learn a bit more about you and your needs and your life stage. And probiotics were found to be helpful at improving bone density. So there's the link to the gut microbiome. Let's look a little bit closer at the vitamin D. So this study looked at vitamin D diet, vitamin D supplement, and the effect it had on the bone mineral density. So it was a big study. This one, 1,294 participants. The diet was this lovely Mediterranean diet. And think about that picture in the earlier slides of all the brightly coloured vegetables and salad, whole grains, extra virgin olive oil, oily fish, and largely plant-based as well. And what they had was the diet, the Mediterranean diet, and they had this in the UK, in the NHS, we have the recommended daily amount of 400 international units. They had that as part of the intervention. And they found that the serum vitamin D significantly increased compared to the control group, which didn't have the intervention. And after 1 year, the intervention had no effect on the bone mineral density, but interestingly, it did significantly reduce the rate of the loss of the bone at that femoral neck. Remember what I said about the cartoon bone and that bit before the knobbly bit at the end. So in people with osteoporosis, it significantly reduced the rate of bone loss there, which is critical for us to know. So it does help for sure, if you've already got osteopenia or osteoporosis, vitamin D would kind of definitely be something that you should be looking at, but test your levels and know what you need, and always supplement with vitamin K2. So this study was looking at collagen. That is a minefield, isn't it? So there's so many different collagen supplements out there at the moment. It's that knowing which one to have, which one works, which one doesn't. And they all say that, you need to be doing it regularly, like for 3 months to see any effects. However, this study did demonstrate that the intake of collagen peptides did increase bone mineral density in postmenopausal women. But in addition, it saw a favourable shift in bone markers, so seeing that the increased bone formation and reduced the digging the holes. So the bone matrix looked denser and reduced that fragility in the bone tissue. So that was a useful finding. Vitamin D, going back to this because it is so important, I've talked a lot about vitamin D today, but I would like to know when we come to the Q&A at the end, so when I stop the recording, I want you to just think about this question because I want to chat to you about it. I'm intrigued to know and curious to know, have you been tested for vitamin D and were you found to be deficient? And when I was in the Osteoporosis Society talk and I asked everyone in the room, I said, were you tested for vitamin D? And they said, no, they weren't tested at all and they weren't given a DEXA scan. I just think this would be a brilliant preventative measure to find out what your vitamin D levels are because it's so important. So park that thought for a moment, and when we come to Q&A, I'm going to chat to you about that in more detail. So the symptoms of a deficiency in vitamin D, so you can start to think whether this is relevant to you. The most common symptom I see is tiredness, that sort of feeling exhausted all the time. Joint pain, also poor immunity, so that propensity to pick up all the bugs. If you're that person that picks up all the chest infections, colds, also continuous UTI infections, and if you've got an autoimmune disease, you're going to be more likely to need more vitamin D as well. If you've got predisposing factors like pre-diabetes, diabetes, or if you're very overweight, you will need more vitamin D than the next person. Also, being of Asian descent as well means that you're more likely to need more vitamin D than the next person too. Right, so I've jumped the gun a little bit. So just to ramping up this talk about the gut microbiome with you. And what we saw in this study, and yes, the study was done on rats, but it was a really interesting study. And I have found some studies on humans, but at the time I did these slides, I didn't have that one. And so this study was done on rats, but it was really interesting because the outcome was that this specific probiotic strain, Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, actually did regulate the gut microbiome by improving the intestinal barrier and stimulating the Th1 response. You don't need to know what this is if it gets too sciencey, but the Th17 and Th1 response is your immune response. And this actually had an impact on the bone building cells. And so it was shown to be really effective this is the connection between the gut and the bones. And there is some interspeak here. We know that the gut microbiome is influencing bone health. So it's a really interesting finding, but it's all quite new. So there's not loads of studies out there at the moment, but why not think about that and how you can include it in your diet? We're talking more and more about how to get these live fermented foods in our diet. So you don't necessarily need to have it as a supplement, but I would definitely encourage you to be having that as your breakfast, having some kefir, some live yogurt. It's got the calcium, it's got the live bacteria, it's anti-inflammatory, it's brilliant for gut health. We know it has an influence on bone health. So considering all of those factors, why not include that? So here's a quick recap. The quality and the diversity of a diet is way more important than coming down to the micro nutrient of what specific nutrient you need. So rather than just looking at prunes or looking at almonds or looking at fish, it's the overall diversity of your diet and thinking about this Mediterranean picture with lots of brightly coloured fruit, vegetables, leafy greens, lovely whole grains, oats, buckwheat and quinoa and nuts and seeds and oily fish. Brilliant, brilliant diversity of nutrients that are going to help protect your bones. And obviously avoiding those ultra processed foods because they are so inflammatory. My top tip would be to make sure you're getting enough protein. So if you want to get my advice on that, you can book your free discovery call and I can help you work that out. Always get your regular servings of fruit, vegetables, and salad every day. Aim for 3 to 4 servings of oily fish a day. Fermented dairy every day is a really nice thing to include. Red wine and beer in moderation. Exercise, we know, is really important for strength, for bone building, for that bone remodeling picture, and for balance. And if you do already have some gut related issues, so if you know you have IBS, if you know you have acid reflux, if you know something's just out of kilter in your gut, don't ignore it, because that means there is a problem in the gut. That means that something's not working properly. Either you're not digesting or breaking down your food. So you can have the loveliest diet in the world, but what if you're not able to actually digest and break down those nutrients and absorb them so they can get to the bone tissue? So we're looking at that gastrointestinal lining, that border of where that digestion occurs. Are you digesting your food properly? If you've got any problems with digestion and gut problems, it really is worth spending some time to seek professional advice. You can book your free discovery call and we can talk about it, but please, please, please don't ignore it, because it is a sign that something's not right. And we can do so much to improve that. And then you can get all the most of the lovely nutrients out of your diet that you're eating and make sure it's getting to the bones. But also it's a sign that there might be some inflammation there. And if there is inflammation, we know that's a risk factor. So assess your risk and get personalised advice. And functional testing, because testing gives us the answers without the guesswork. So you can come to me, book a free discovery call, and I can tell you about the different tests available. There are so many tests available, I wouldn't know which one to advise until I speak to you, because I can get you the best tailor-made advice and test that suits your needs. There is a wellness test that I run at the minute that does 58 blood markers. It's brilliant, but it might be that you might be better off spending your money on a gut test, so like a stool test, if your predominant problems are gut related. So assess your risk, test, don't guess is my motto. Book your free discovery and let's have a chat. So this is the wellness test I was just talking about. It does 58 blood markers. It assesses your risk for osteoporosis and osteopenia by checking off those deficiencies. We need to make sure that you have all the nutrients that you need for your best health, including bone health. So we can do that through a test. It's not very expensive. For the 58 blood markers, it's the best price test that I've found. Very easy to do. And as a special offer in October only, and this is going to be a first come first serve thing because I'm limited because it's just me, you can book a nutrition power hour for just £99. So that's 1 hour private online Zoom where I'll give you the full analysis. I will research and analyze your personal information, your diet, your lifestyle, your history, your medication, if you're on meds. And then I will give you a personalised plan. We will create that together in that Zoom and give you the recipes, and we can talk about which tests might be appropriate for you, if any are appropriate at all. I will always try and do things through diet first. So rest assured, if you book that power hour, you're not going to leave with a big long bill and lists of supplements and tests. I will always try and do it through the food first. But there are some people that have underlying risk factors, or you already have a condition that might mean we need to dig a little bit deeper and we need some answers, and the tests help us to do that. Right, so there's a lovely visual overview. We're coming to the end of the slide deck. So think diversity, think colour, think variety, think getting those fermented dairies in, think getting all of your nuts and seeds in there, really important for bone density, great source of calcium. And here's my favorite recipes for bone density. It's a really quick, easy one. I make this quite a lot at home. Butternut coconut chickpea curry. It's ready in 20 minutes. It's all, I've got stuff ready in the freezer in the cupboard, so I can make this in a whiz. And it tastes amazing. So screenshot that, and please visit my website as well, because I think this and lots of other recipes are there for you. So visit my website. You can go to evnutrition.co.uk. There's a recipe page, help yourself. There's also a news page where you can read lots of other blogs on other topics that you might find interesting. Give me a follow. I would love you to follow me on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. So give me a follow on Instagram, Facebook, especially because it's a really nice way for us to keep in touch. And you can message me on there quite easily if you have a question. And thank you so much for listening to me. I'm going to finish the presentation now. Oh, here's a good idea as well. If you go onto my website, you can subscribe to my newsletter. It's not spammy. I don't share your information, but you will get some really lovely recipes and research and tips in your email inbox. And I'm not efficient enough to get it out more than once a month, so you won't be inundated, I promise. But that's a nice way for us to keep in touch too and get my latest offers and things. So do go to my website and sign up. I've got a newsletter coming out soon that's got some free protein recipes and winter soups that you might really love as well. So make sure you get onto that. Right, I'm going to stop the recording. And how do I do that? Stop recording. There.